Like many hauntings and/or poltergeist activity that have taken place throughout history, the following story follows a similar pattern, especially when a young person is involved. Activity can sometimes be generated by a strong energy, with the young person creating a sort of psychokinesis or telekinesis, with the action of mind on matter in which objects are caused to move or change as a result of mental concentration upon them. However, in many cases, the individual has no control over their condition. With this particular story, the problem started out as telekinesis, with knockings and bangings, but became violent as it slowly progressed to communications with spirits. The AMHERST mystery was a case of poltergeist activity in AMHERST, Nova Scotia, Canada, between 1878 and 1879. It was investigated by Walter Hubble, an actor who had interest in psychic phenomena and kept a diary of events in the house. The mystery centred around Esther Cox, who lived in a house with her married sister Olive Teed, Olive's husband Daniel, and their 2 young children. A brother and sister of Esther and Olive also lived in the house, as did Daniel's brother John Teed. Events began at the end of August 1878, after Esther Cox, 18, was subjected to an attempted sexual assault by a male friend. The assault left her in distress, and a short time later, the physical phenomena began. First there were knockings, bangings, and rustlings at night. Then Esther started having seizures where her body would swell up and she started to suffer from fevers and chills. Then objects in the house started moving. The family had now become so distressed that they called in a doctor. Whilst the doctor was present, bedclothes moved, scratching noises were heard, and the words, "Esther Cox, you are mine to kill," appeared on the wall by the head of Esther's bed. The doctor administered sedatives to Esther to calm her and help her sleep. But this appeared to make matters even worse, and the paranormal activity increased, with more noises and flying objects. They attempted to communicate with the spirit, which resulted in tapped responses to questions. The unusual activity continued for many months. Word of the frightening events at AMHERST had now spread to the community. There were many visitors to AMHERST who witnessed the strange events, and when the clergyman visited, he too heard banging and knocking and witnessed moving objects, often when Esther herself was close by. In December 1878, Esther had fallen seriously ill with diphtheria, and had left the house to spend 2 weeks in bed recuperating at the home of a married sister in Sackville, New Brunswick. While she was away from the house, the strange phenomena suddenly ceased. However, after recovering, she returned home to Amherst only to have the events resume, but this time the activity had now increased, with the outbreak of fires in various places in the house. With Esther now in a weakened state, she was now claiming to see the ghost which threatened to burn the house down unless she left. In January 1879, Esther moved out of the house to live with another family. But this time, the events had followed her to her new surroundings, where the activity had even more witnesses. Some of the witnesses were able to communicate with the entity by asking it questions, followed by rapt answers. Others were just curious, while some were sympathetic. Many felt Esther was responsible for the happenings, and in other cases, she was met with hostility. Esther was frequently slapped, pricked, and scratched by the entity, and on one occasion was stabbed in the back with a knife. In late March, Esther spent some time in St. John, New Brunswick, where she was investigated by some local specialists who had an interest in science, and it was at this stage that several distinct spirits that had been associated with Esther started communicating with onlookers via knocks and rappings. Some of the spirits had actually come forward with their names, and one of them was the original entity from Amherst called Bob Nickel, who claimed to have been a shoemaker when he was alive. Another said his name was Peter Cox and claimed to have been a relative of Esther's, and another called herself Maggie Fisher. After leaving St. John, Esther resided with some friends called the Van Ambergs on a farm near Amherst, but returned to the Teeds cottage in the summer of 1879, where the strange phenomena once again resumed. Whilst all of the publicity was happening around Esther Cox, a man called Walter Hubble has shown close interest in her unfortunate series of paranormal events. In order to study the phenomena in more detail, Hubble moved into Teed Cottage as a lodger. He would spend many weeks with Esther and the family, where he personally witnessed moving objects, fires, and items appearing from nowhere. He also witnessed Esther having fits along with the extreme swelling and observed her being attacked with pins and other sharp objects. Hubble too was able to communicate with the spirits by rapping, and they gave him their names, with the first calling herself Mary Fisher. Then came Jane Nichol, followed by Eliza McNeil. They were all part of a phenomena. With the assistance of Hubble, Esther Cox embarked on a speaking tour, attracting audiences who paid to see her and hear her story. But Esther eventually abandoned her tours due to ongoing heckling and hostility. Esther then returned home to Amherst and worked alongside a man called Arthur Davison. But one night his barn burned down and he accused her of arson, where she was convicted and sentenced to 4 months jail, but was released after serving only 1 month. After this incident, the usual phenomena slowly decreased and eventually stopped for good. Esther Cox would go on to marry twice and had a son by each of her husbands. She moved to Brockton, Massachusetts with the second husband and passed on the 8th of November 1912, aged 52. In 1879, Walter Hubble was so fascinated by what he had observed that he wrote a book about the paranormal events called The Great Amherst Mystery, which sold 55,000 copies. The Amherst case was also investigated by the British paranormal researcher Hereward Carrington, who took statements from surviving witnesses of the events in 1907 and published them along with detailed accounts of the case in 1913.